Please join me in a rousing welcome for Russ Gaskin and Cliff Kayser.
Good morning.
Thank you, John. Feels great to be here. Thank you. So how do we solve the most vexing problems of our time? We don't. Because some are not problems to solve, and trying to solve them just makes them worse.
Many of you know Donella Meadows, a brilliant and compassionate human being who helped many of us understand how to think in systems. And one of her brilliant pieces of work is this list of 12 places to intervene in a system, a very short paper, possibly the most powerful paper in systems dynamics and in change thinking. According to Dana, the most powerful place to intervene if you want to shift a system to one that works better, that's more sustainable, that's healthier, that's more resilient, is the power to transcend paradigms. She also says it's a very difficult place to work. Other people don't like it when you transcend their paradigms. So our question is how? How do we do it together? How do we operate at this level together?
So the dominant paradigm in our nation, in our world, is problem-solving thinking through either or. What we need is to pay attention to the fact that there's value in this way of thinking, and it's not enough. There's another necessary paradigm that we need to pay attention to around leveraging polarities through both-and thinking. Together they offer the most powerful way to transcend our paradigms.
So we're going to talk about this useful additional way of seeing. In our experience, it addresses our highest values and our deepest fears. It really brings people into the room in a way, actually, that grows love, acceptance, wisdom. It applies to all levels and all sectors of society. We'll give you examples from across industries, across sectors, and at multiple levels. It reveals why in our social dynamics, in our values dynamics, we victimize others and they victimize us. And it helps us flip this chronic conflict because we're working at the deepest level, at the values level, into innovation and engagement. So we're going to share some stories, some actual stories with real faces of real people who are doing this work. We're going to talk about politics. Mark sent an email about not talking about politics, but we said, no, but we have such a great way of talking about politics. So we're going to engage you in a discussion about politics, and frankly, even though it's the other thing you're not supposed to talk about with your family, we're going to maybe touch on religion too while we're at it. So we're going to illustrate 10 principles too that you can take away to understand the polarity dynamic and how to work with it.
So we're talking about integrative values leadership today. Talking about people who are leading from a different paradigm. So we're going to introduce Dave. Dave's the Deputy Chief Administrative Officer, Information Officer for the Department of Defense. August of 2001, it was business as usual, and we all know what happened in September of 2001. Everything changed. So for Dave, what did that mean for his work? Well, one thing was the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. And by March of 2003, the department was empowered to coordinate domestic security across the nation. And they created a mandate where there was a requirement to share information between agencies, including local law enforcement. The assertion was, and the analysis was, that it was the lack of information sharing that may have been a key contributor to September 11th happening in the first place. Dave's team wasn't happy. They're responsible for information security. This requirement to share information from their perspective meant that they had to start opening some doors and windows of this house, and from their perspective, that was going to create other problems that may be just as bad. People could die from the same thing. So, Dave's got an issue. He's got to make a tough call. Does he support the mandate? Does he push his team? What does he do here? He's in a bind. What we'd like you to do right now is turn into your tables and talk about, what does Dave do? Support the mandate, support his team? What is it? So we're going to give you about 1 or 2 minutes here, and when I ring the bell, we'll be done, and then we'll come back together. Okay? Go ahead.
All right, so let's do a poll. How many people said he should push on restricting the data sharing mandate? He can do this. He can have a conversation. He's a civilian employee. Doesn't have to just take orders. So he could push back a little bit. Raise your hand if you felt he should do this. Okay? How many people said his team's got to suck it up? He really doesn't have a choice. How many people said both? You are polarity thinkers. Now, of course, Dave's situation wasn't quite as crystal clear as this. There's lots of pushing and pulling and people in different positions. So we have a little bit more clarity, the benefit of hindsight, than Dave had. But the question is, how did he do it? You don't just say to your team, suck it up, it's the mandate, we got to go ahead. He wants engagement, and he wants to comply with the mandate. So we're going to set Dave's story aside for a bit and come back to it, so that as we unpack some other polarity dynamics, we'll get more insight into how Dave might have addressed this. Our political dynamics seem broken in many countries, and I know there are some people from some countries here who are managing polarities really well in their societies and especially in their governments. So bear with us. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of US politics, but we're going to generalize it so it's globalized. And we want to understand better what's happening so we can figure out what can we do about this. And this is a political example, and politics are everywhere, in teams, organizations, communities, states. So let's look at the story of how this political conflict is playing out in the US. These are widening partisan differences between Republicans and Democrats, conservative and liberals, in the US over the past 25 years on a 48-point scale. Systematically widening gap in social policy. It's across all these dimensions. This is the widening of this gap between Republicans and Democrats in the past 25 years. We've all seen these pictures, right? We see them in the US and we see them in many countries. So who's right? Who's wrong? There are a lot of people, if you watch the nightly news and these talking heads, you know, they get a nice liberal and a nice conservative and they go at it and it's like, gotcha, got you back.
Blowing cliches.
As Peter says, blowing cliches. So what's going on here? It starts with values.
So, what we're going to do is a quick exercise, and I'm going to name a value, and you tell us by raising your hand whether you most associate that value with either conservative or liberal politics. So we're going to start out real easy. So work with me here. I'm going to flash a word or a value, and you raise your hand. So first two will be just testers.
Let me add one thing. Do not think.
Yeah. It would be very helpful if everyone would put any type of thinking aside.
The danger in us doing this is we know you're systems thinkers. We know you can see the whole picture. So what we're looking for is implicit bias. What's your first instinctual response, okay?
Starting out easy. Do you most associate this word with conservative? Raise your hand if it's conservative, or liberal. Raise your hand if you, okay. I think we're off to a good start.
Yeah, I think so.
Ready? This is the next tester. Left. Do you most associate this with conservative or liberal? Okay.
All right. That's just a little bit of tuning, right?
I'm going to go a little faster now. All right, think about this one. Deregulation. Deregulation. Do you most associate this with conservative politics or liberal politics? Okay. Collective good. Do you most associate this with conservative politics or liberal politics? Environmental needs. Conservative politics, liberal politics. Business. Conservative, liberal. Okay. Military solutions. Conservative, liberal. Government. Conservative, liberal.
I'm surprised at that one.
Economic needs. Conservative, liberal. Social needs.
What was that?
Conservative. Oh. Let's do that one again. Economic needs. Conservative, raise them high. Liberal. Social needs. Conservative, liberal. Okay.
What was that? Sorry.
It's liberal. Diplomatic solutions. Conservative, liberal. Individual benefit. Focus on the individual. Conservative, liberal. Regulation. Conservative, liberal. Material needs. Conservative, liberal. Okay. What do we got?
Okay. Conservative, we have, what's that? Right here? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sure you all associate conservative with conservative.
Good job.
Okay. So this is a process that we've done with a few groups, and we're actually kind of validating it. This is the largest group we've done it with, and possibly the most diverse globally. So what we've come up with here is conservative, deregulation, business, military solutions, individual benefit, material needs. Liberal, collective good, environmental needs, government, economic needs, social needs, diplomatic solutions, and regulation. So when we've done this with other groups, and by the way, we've done this with some very liberal groups, some very conservative groups, and we've done it with transpartisan dialogues. Interesting, we have a little bit of a difference here around economic needs, and this is focus on the economy as a solution set. So what we did in our sample here was we just gave you one word. Usually we're giving a phrase. So we're doing this in the interest of time. So it's close, except for one factor. So we're going to work with this data set up here. And let's understand economic needs as a focus on the economic institutions as problem solvers for societies, okay?
It's not. You need to put it on slideshow. It's not on slideshow.
Whoops. There's Dave again. Hi, Dave. Whoa.
Oh, gosh. Remember these?
This is just a review.
Here we go.
All right. So please take out a piece of paper. This works best if you put it in the landscape mode, wider ends on the right and left, and replicate what we have here, just the grid. And ironically, because we're being ironic here, put conservative on the left, liberal on the right, trying to keep you awake. All right, while you do that, I'm going to go on. Looking at the way we've grouped these values, we're going to populate that grid with some data. Conservative values, individual benefit, business, economy as a solution provider, deregulation, material needs, military solutions. To yourself, individually, we want you to generate the top 3 beneficial results for society of attending to these values, of focusing on these values. So what are the good things that this gets us? So this is in the top left quadrant above the word conservative. What are the top 3 good things, just phrases, that these values give us? 1 minute. Okay? We'll share these in a bit. Let's go on. We're going to keep populating this. Now in the bottom left quadrant, below the word conservative, the same set of values. What are the top 3 negative results we'll get by overemphasizing this set of values as a society? What are the bad things that we get if we overemphasize these particular values?
Bless you.
Bless you again. Okay, we're following the Peter Block theory of never give enough time. All right, what are the top 3 beneficial results? This is above the word liberal on the top right quadrant. What are the top 3 beneficial results of attending to this set of values as a society? What are the good things we get when we attend to these values? And one more. In the bottom right quadrant, what are the top 3 negative results we'll get as a society if we overemphasize this liberal set of values? What are the bad things that we'll get as a society? Okay.
Okay, the next step is we're going to ask you to turn into your tables again and share your results. So that's actually job number 1. Share your results. Make sure that everybody at the table can see what you put in for all 4 quadrants. That's step 1. Step 2 is to begin noticing what are some of the themes some of the same words, the same phrases that started to emerge as you shared those, the content in these 4 quadrants. So we're going to give you 5 minutes. Now, this is a timer, and it's already started at 5 minutes. So this is an example of what this looks like while it's rolling. I'm going to start it over. When it's done, it's going to be down there at sort of 6 o'clock. So you can sort of self-manage to make sure that everybody's voice is heard in this process, and that you can all share your maps, and then also start to develop the themes. Okay, so that's the job here. So this is what it's going to look like at the end, and we just started your 5 minutes. Very quickly, let's try to get some common themes. And would it be okay if I helped you populate? Okay, what do I use here?
Cliff, this is going to be recorded for posterity.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'll hurt. All right. So I think we need to go the other way around. Yeah. So how do we fix that? Okay, I'll let that happen over here. Here's my question. Were there a couple tables out there where you looked at the upside of conservative and you said, my gosh, look at all the agreement that we had. We're practically saying the same thing. Was there a table out there that, and my runners with the microphones get ready here, was there anybody that had some really great agreement in that top left-hand quadrant?
Here's the list that we put together when we've done this with other groups. This is more abstracted and kind of consolidated into themes. Very similar. Upsides of conservative values, we get innovation and entrepreneurship. You keep what you earn, individual opportunity. We're respected as a global leader for our strength. We overemphasize those things to the neglect of the other perspective. We get increasing discrepancies between haves and have-nots, exploitation of common resources, opportunity for a privileged few, and we heard global isolation specifically. So if we're a society in the downsides of this conservative perspective, a lot of people say, this is wrong. We need to go there. We need more of taking care of one another, protecting our shared resources, ensuring opportunity for all, and we want to be more respected as a global leader for our diplomacy. Then we overcorrect. This is that 20, 30-year swing that we used to have. Now it's a 5 or 10-minute swing. We overcorrect and we get passivity and lack of initiative, entitlement, overregulation, security vulnerability. We can quibble about terms here, but the pattern is the same. And the pattern is the same on any polarity.
So the next step is we're going to identify a higher purpose. At your tables, I want you to look at the upsides of the conservative and liberal values and describe, and you can look up here, we've captured just the upsides here, and you've heard some of the upsides of both. You've got your individual list, you've had your conversations at your table. Talk about, in one short phrase, when you get all of those things in those upside quadrants, those 2 upside quadrants, what does it give you? What's the tagline? What's the short phrase that describes what the outcome of those things are? 1 minute in your table teams. We'll stop you in a minute. Let's talk about the deeper fear. When you look at both downsides, and you have the experience of getting both downsides, describe the society that we get, or that we don't get, in one short phrase. Here's a little hint. It's the opposite of your higher purpose. So this should only take about 30 seconds. Go.
All right. So you know what you came up with. we're gonna share with you what we've generalized from having done this process before. And here's one take on it. Some people actually say Denmark. Many people say something about a thriving, resilient democracy. Interestingly, doesn't matter what the sector is, what the group is, what the community is, thriving and resilient often come up in a higher purpose. They're very descriptive words for what we aspire to in human society. Then we get things like, if we get this, a failing polarized democracy, implosion, an imploding plutocracy, things like that. So there are feelings that go along with these too, right? What's it like to live in one society, and what's it like to live in the other?
So what happens is we tend to polarize around these values, and the energy system there is around valuing the upsides of your preferred pole, which you associate with the higher purpose, and connecting with some deep fears around the opposite of those things, which you associate with the deeper fear or the deepest fear. So just notice that there's a directional energy going on here. We're repulsed by those things. We're repulsed by those things, and we want to move towards those values for that higher purpose.
Same thing happens from the other perspective. Note that the higher purpose and the deeper fear are the same for everyone in the system at some level. Maybe not everyone. But we have the same energy system, the value-fear dynamic. The things that repulse us, the things that we're afraid of, the things that we form horror stories about the future of our countries around, and the things that we want, that we value, that we aspire to.
Polarity principle, number 1. We fear losing the things we value most. Fear arises from the perception that others are causing the loss of something that we deeply value.
And we know that Yoda said, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to the dark side. So, when we're working toward the upsides in any polarity, and we have some sense of what's going on in this polarity here, we're working toward that higher purpose. We're creating this synergistic effect. You have a term for this in systems thinking and values dynamics. It's the same thing. It's a virtuous cycle. This is synergistic and generative energy, taking the best of both and working toward the upsides. We have a live demonstration over here from Cliff. Hey, Cliff.
It's kind of fun.
So they keep going.
What's happening here is you're achieving all the benefits of both upsides, and you're minimizing the downsides through an intentional, choiceful, conscious leveraging of both upsides in service of the higher purpose.
So notice that we're not ignoring the downsides. There's a touching into that because we're all aware of those. We all need to address our fears and our values, which makes this the more integrative model in our change processes. So polarity principle number 2, work toward the upsides of both values, and you create a virtuous cycle leading to a higher purpose.
We can do the opposite as well, create a vicious cycle. This is basically the first 3/4 of Meg's presentation from yesterday, I think. Mm-hmm. And we're familiar with it, all too familiar with it. So, shall we move on?
I have a question, though. What does it feel like to be working in these upsides? Whenever we ask that question of groups who have done this process, in any polarity, we hear hope, optimism, trust, collaboration. Here, when we're getting the downsides, we hear despair, frustration, anger, hatred, blame.
Polarity principle number 3, when you overemphasize one value over time to the neglect of its pair, you first get the downsides of the chosen value. And over time, you also get the downsides of the other one as well. A vicious cycle of polarization that eventually leads to the downsides. A vicious cycle.
So how do we treat each other in this?
Well, not too well. Usually what we tend to do here, and this is all too familiar, is we tend to positively stereotype our own values as if they have no downside, and we negatively stereotype the other as if their values have no upside. So if I'm a liberal,
I'm a conservative.
am responsible, I'm just, and I'm compassionate, and you, my friend, are greedy, selfish, and a fascist. It's just faster.
Well,
that
I
way.
have another perspective. Your agenda, and I do mean agenda, is going to lead us to entitlement, overregulation, socialism. We, on the other hand, are the patriotic job creators who are protecting our freedoms.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. And you, tree-hugging, moocher socialist, are destroying our society.
Polarity principle number 4, we tend to make other individuals or groups containers for the values we disfavor. We positively stereotype our own value. We negatively stereotype the other value as if it has no upside. So what we've done here is we've assembled these values according to their interdependency, the polarity. The polarity is an interdependent value pair that needs each other over time. So what we've done is we've positioned these around the way they tend to show up, oftentimes in the same conversation. It's either this or this. We have to make a choice. Notice the or. Notice the either-or thinking, the power of either-or thinking. We can't be both. That's the paradigm. We've got to choose. It's a false choice. As a matter of fact, Jim Collins in the book Good to Great calls this the tyranny of the or.
I'll note, too, that in this context, economic needs versus environmental needs probably sounds like a more familiar dynamic. This is a both-and perspective. This is when we embrace both values in the pairs, and we say, we don't want a false choice. We want both. What does it look like to have a society that optimizes individual benefit and collective good? How do we rely on the best of what business brings to a society and the best of what government brings? How do we synergistically meet our economic and environmental needs? And you can see some of that happening. We're going to share some examples. Polarity principle number 5, all values come in pairs. Many of these you're living with every day. You are always living with activity and rest. If you work in any way, you're always working with work and home. We're always dealing with the short term and the long term. And in fact, in the business literature, increasingly in the past 50 years, there's been a systematic increase in discussing polarity tensions, either specific ones or whole groups of them, as in Jim Collins' work. So Thomas Kilman, who does the conflict mode assessment, leverages that polarity of when to be assertive and when to be cooperative and how to maximize and optimize both. Robert Greenleaf said, let's get the best of serving and the best of leadership, and he created a new paradigm in servant leadership. Carl Jung, we know many of those: introversion and extroversion, intuitive and sensing, judging and perceiving. There are many, many polarities.
I wouldn't try to take notes here. These things live in us, and we live in them. It's not as if we have a choice. We have a choice in how well we leverage them. But they act on us, whether we believe in them or not, kind of like gravity. So, many of you are probably familiar with this image. Anybody who hasn't seen this image? Probably not in this crew. So if you see, this is a great visual illustration of a polarity. If you see a goblet or a vase, it's because the black is in the foreground and the white is in the background. So this figure ground perspective is important when we talk about polarities. If you see two faces, it's because the white is in the foreground and the black is in the background. And so it would be, in some ways, kind of absurd to have an argument about whether this is a goblet or two faces, because once you've seen both, you actually have new eyes. You have new eyes around this image. You never look at it quite the same way after you've seen both. It's hard to turn back that clock. Of course, you could completely delude yourself, I suppose. And we've got some cave dwellers out there, citizens against virtually everything, and that can happen. But what's missing here is actually the dynamic. So let's talk about the dynamic, and let's just go through a very simple, easy metaphor that describes how all polarities work. If you get this, you get how all interdependent pairs work.
Oh, and you do get it because you're doing it right now.
Yeah, you got to. On the count of three, I'm going to ask everybody to take a deep breath and hold it. You ready? I'll tell you what to do next. No one's going to expire here today, so no worries. On the count of three. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Ah, yeah. Now that felt pretty good. You just got oxygen, right? And the more I stand here and run my mouth, you're starting to experience the downsides of inhaling, which is too much carbon dioxide. Let it out. Ah, I heard a sigh of relief. That felt pretty good. Why? Because you just released carbon dioxide, am I right? Let's roll back this tape. It felt pretty good, then it didn't. Then it did. Now what's going to happen? You see where I'm going with this? This is how all polarities work. This is easy to conceptualize because the feedback loop is so short. If you don't take care of this thing pretty well, you're in big trouble. This helps you thrive, helps you stay away from this deeper fear. Is anybody confused?
Hey, Cliff, are you paying attention to this polarity now?
Right.
So it becomes figural. Sometimes we don't think about this polarity except maybe sometimes when we're meditating, exercising, etc., or when we're like this.
All values come in pairs. These pairs are interdependent. You've been in that inhale, exhale since you took your first breath, first little spank in the behind. You'll be in it until you take your last breath, which is hopefully no time soon. But you're in it. And we're all in it. And we're all in these things we call polarities.
So here's an organizational example. It could be societal. We're gonna focus on a company. We want decentralization. Specifically, we want the benefits of decentralization, the speed, adaptability, the flexibility, the responsiveness on the ground, the ability for people to make the call when they need to make the call, say, for the customer. We love this stuff so much. We embed it into all of our systems. We decentralize as much as possible. We put in new IT systems. We develop a culture of on-the-ground decision-making. And we start to get silos, redundancies, two different divisions calling the same customer to sell a very similar product, things like that. So what happens here? That CEO gets fired, and the board brings in a new CEO. And this CEO is a turnaround expert who said, well, hey, I know what this problem is. We got silos, redundancies, et cetera. We need some efficiency.
You need a consultant is what you need.
Okay, yeah, I want to get from these siloing and redundancies, I want to get the efficiencies and economies of scale.
I can help you with that.
All right.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I'll help you
Thanks,
get
man.
from there to there. All right, take about 6 months. Good deal. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm going to get to work.
Now, the consultant said 6 months, but it took 2 or 3 years, right?
Oh, and I'm gonna need a little bit.
Yeah, there you go.
Thanks.
So we overcorrected. We were so in love with efficiencies, economies of scale, a trimmer balance sheet. We overcorrected. And a few years in, we start to get the bureaucracy, the poor responsiveness, the red tape. Nobody can make a decision without running all the way up the 7 levels and all the way back down, if you even get a decision back on what you asked.
You need a consultant.
Yeah. Well, it's a new CEO, right?
No, we need to reorganize.
So, the board says, obviously this isn't working, let's get a new CEO. The CEO doesn't have institutional memory. The people in the organization are like, hey, didn't we do a decentralization thing 10 years ago or 5 years ago? Okay? So I've just paid my consultant again. And if it's a big enough enterprise, I've spent millions of dollars in these restructuring and culture change initiatives.
Actually,
It's all in the service of a sustainable, you need more?
no. I'm thinking there's a better way.
Okay.
Had you seen this as a polarity to start with, we could have tied your success to both decentralization and centralization. We could have done this whole thing one time. Save yourself some money and have a new conversation about how do we get speed and adaptability and efficiencies, economies of scale in service of a sustainable, agile enterprise. Would you be interested in having that conversation? Because I think just looking at this from an either-or perspective alone is not helpful.
I would love that.
Great.
And note that it only costs $40. So the same higher purpose, the same deeper fear drives that decision making. What's the difference between this and breathing? Breathing is, of course, autonomic. It involves one person. The critical difference is the time cycle of the feedback loop. Breathing is what, a few seconds? This kind of thing is months and years. So we lose our memory about what happened. We don't see the whole picture. And then, of course, this is the gap analysis. We're also good at gap analysis because we're problem solvers and either or thinkers, and we say, well, we got this and we need that. Let's go do that and pay the consultants to help us on that. And this is our version of fixes that fail. Because we didn't take into account the value of the upsides of both centralization and decentralization, our fixes will fail. Because they're only partial fixes. All right, I'm going to do this quickly and keep moving. There are lots of solutions out there for these things. This is Gleicher's change formula. It starts with dissatisfaction, and we go up to the vision of the way we want things to be. When that times first steps are greater than resistance, we get change, right? Nice gap tool. And very important in change as a part of the story. Future Search came in and said, we need to create a really compelling vision of the future, working from our present and bringing people forward that engages all of our people and all of our best thinking. And we have great tools like shadow work and fear-based work, therapy, coaching, et cetera, things that help people deal with some of the fears so that they can be operating in the upsides of their values. And appreciative inquiry, of course, is not just about the past and the present. It looks forward into the future. One of the contributions of appreciative inquiry was to look at our past and to look at who we are today and recognize our positive core from which we could envision a new future. So we've got pieces that all fit together that are helping us do parts of this system. If we use them together, we use them effectively, and we recognize the whole picture together, we get a whole system and integrative approach to change.
It's probably worth mentioning here that the Pegasus community and Pegasus helps us achieve our higher purpose. And it's probably no accident that they've been around with their mission for 22 years to help pull a lot of these these systems together and have great conversations around them.
So we have things to help us deal with that dynamic and the mindset of scarcity and deficiency. We have to recognize that those things are in us. And we have things, especially with the positive psychology and positive change movement, that help us work in the upsides and get abundancy and sufficiency.
So, you're already familiar with a lot of the contents of this map. This is the polarity map, at least it's part of it. It's the interior portion. The thing to pay attention to here, and we have to be a little bit careful because we spent a week, just a couple weeks ago, at the Federal Executive Institute talking about how to distinguish a problem from a polarity, how to identify pole names. So we're giving you, kind of a quick fix here on this. The rookie error is to not name the poles neutrally or positively. So please don't make that mistake if you go out and try to use this right away. An example might be, people get excited and they say, rigidity and flexibility, it's a polarity. Just because there's tension.
I want to be rigid.
You want to be rigid?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to put you in the downside then. So rigidity would be actually not a neutral pole name or a positive pole name. It would be something in the downside, actually could be the downside of structure. Over-focusing on structure could be rigidity. Someone might say, what about structure and ambiguity? Is that a polarity? Well, the pole name ambiguity isn't really neutral or positive. So ambiguity sounds like it's in the downside of something, probably an over-focus on maybe flexibility. So let's put that in the downside. But structure and flexibility, those are both neutral or positive. We can work with that. It's going to be very difficult to populate a map with non-neutral pole names because it's hard to think about an upside of something that's negative. Okay, so I'm just going to leave you with that. And also, just mention that there are other components of the map that we don't really have time to get into today that are extremely important. Once you've populated a map, the action steps on either side are things that you do, things that we do together in relationship that help us achieve the upsides of both poles. This helps create the virtuous cycle and avoid the vicious cycle. Early warning signs. These are early indicators that we're starting to bump down into the deeper fears. They're measurable. We can track them. We can keep out of those downsides. We can intentionally and choicefully empower the upsides. When we pay attention to both of those things simultaneously, we create a virtuous cycle. This is the how. This is the how to achieve the higher purpose. This is how not to get sucked into either or thinking and make these false choices and fixes that fail.
So quickly about the term polarities and some of these concepts, we want to honor Barry Johnson, who in 1975 identified these polarities and clearly distinguished them from problems to solve. And there's a methodology for doing that we won't go into today, but it's very important that in our work we're very clear about that distinction and intentional. And one other contribution among many of Barry to this work is that value-fear relationship. So you can do a 2x2 or a conflict cloud, things like that, and they tend to deal with the upsides of the values. They tend to. The fear part of the dynamic is very important to bring into the room and to have people work with. So here are some other terms for this that are in the literature: tensions, dilemmas, paradoxes, opposite strengths, etc. So, solving problems and leveraging polarities is itself a polarity to leverage. Solving problems has gotten us where we are as a species. We save time, we solve problems, we have a sense of accomplishment, we make the decisions we need to make. What kind of car to buy is not a polarity, right? What IT system to choose is not a polarity. There will be polarity dynamics behind those problems and choices, but the problems and choices are not polarities. If we over-focus on this, we start wasting time with unsolvable issues, polarization, and one of my favorite terms, unproductive conflict. When we're leveraging polarities, we leverage productive conflict and differences. It saves time, and we accelerate and sustain the desired change because we're not falling into the fixes that fail. Now, people can get addicted to polarity thinking. You may have met some of these people. They're just like, I think it's all true.
Actually, when you think about it, advocating for both and thinking as a replacement for either or thinking is an example of either or thinking.
Noodle on that one. If you get into this thing that everything's relative, et cetera, you're going to waste time in indecision, frustration, we're going to have a lack of accomplishment. So we need to do both well. So any tool that helps you solve problems effectively, great. Any tool that helps you learn to leverage polarities better and more explicitly, great. Let's do both well. That then gives us highly efficient and effective thinking over time. So polarity principle number 7, solving problems and leveraging polarities are both critical skills.
So let's go back to our story of Dave Wennergren. What do you think he did? You don't have to answer. Let's tell you. Dave was working with a coach. His coach was familiar with polarity thinking. By the way, that gentleman's name was Barry Frew of Frew & Associates, not Barry Johnson, Barry Frew. Barry was using polarity thinking. He said, well, as the story goes, Dave said, I'm in the downside of something. Can you help me? And so they started looking at it from the perspective of, outside of either or, what is the polarity that might need to be leveraged here? The one they came up with was information sharing and information security, both neutral, both positive. What they did is they started building a polarity map together. What are the upsides? What are the downsides from overfocus? What's the higher purpose? What's the deeper fear? Long story short, they started developing action steps, early warning signs.
By the way, I assume you all have security clearance?
Oh, yeah. No. We have permission to share this, and we've stripped out some of the stuff that we can't share. So when Dave saw this, he said, we need to bring this out to the team. So Barry Frew said, we need to bring in Barry Johnson. They started working with the 8 members of the senior team of Dave's, and they did the exact same process, had the exact same conversation, built a very similar polarity map, which you've all had that experience now. Different conversation than which are we going to choose. This was the how that got them out of that malaise. Didn't eliminate the tension, but it certainly gave them a new and different way of having the conversation where even through the polarization, through the value-fear combination, there was a safe place for Dave and for his team to stand as they started moving towards their higher purpose.
So we had these 2 perspectives of information sharing and why that's important and the downsides of not doing that well. And Dave's team, culturally for decades, had been focused on information security. And information security becoming even more important with cyber attacks, et cetera. So they were holding very important values. Both perspectives are accurate, and both perspectives are incomplete. So polarity principle number 8, there are 2 truths in every polarity, and neither is the whole truth. This is Lamberto Andreotti, the CEO of Bristol-Myers Squibb. Lamberto actually had identified these conflicts in their organization, and I'll share one in particular that really brought it into focus. He called them dynamic tensions. And so he said to his team, let's find a way to understand these things and really leverage them. And it so happens that I think it was 2 years ago at a Pegasus conference, we did a breakout session on polarity thinking, and his global head of OD, Julia Urbanchuk, was here. And I noticed that Julia was very engaged in this session. And then we found out why, because a few weeks later, we were with their top 200 leaders spending the morning mapping these dynamic tensions. So it's about the how. he had the recognition, and this was about how do we actually do it and how do we actually systematize it and turn it into a management tool. So it was a big pharma company. They very intentionally sold off business, acquired biotech so they could build their pipeline, and they had culture clashes. Big pharma was stable, predictable, process-driven. Biotech was agile, entrepreneurial. Maybe they make up processes, right? So you had these two cultures coming together, and the question was, Lamberto said, I am not going to make a false choice. I want the best of both. And I want to moderate the downsides of both. So these are a few others that we mapped with them. A nice one is formal structure and working through the formal structure to get things done, working through the matrix and informal relationship to get things done. It was this, and then it was how do we do both well. This is an actual map. I can't go into details, but it's handle complexity and simplification, and it's a nice demonstration of a bunch of senior leaders just taking Post-it notes and building a polarity map really quickly together.
Actually,
this is a very fast process. What's that?
The way I remember it is they were having a real conversation.
Yep.
This is Laura Gross. This is the picture that Laura Gross provided to me.
She's proud of her big fish.
Laura is the manager of governance and leadership development in the chief learning office of the National Education Association. She was using good to great principles as part of their OD processes and having great success. We got together to reconnect after a long period of not being connected, just catching up. I said, how's it going? She said, well, this good to great stuff started out really wonderfully, and it's starting to lose some of its luster, and I need to infuse some excitement back into it, and I don't know how. My response to her was, the good to great principles, actually, Jim Collins talks about tensions. Essentially, they're polarities, interdependent value pairs. I said, we can actually introduce a mapping process and make it more practical and useful if you think that would be something they'd be interested in. She said, give me an example. I said, what's the polarity they're most excited about there? She said, of the Jim Collins group. She said, preserve, core, stimulate, change. Turned a napkin over. We mapped the polarity the same way we've done today. And she got on the phone. Next morning, I was in front of 5 senior leaders, and we were off and running on a year-long process with the senior leaders of the National Education Association, building maps, training internal trainers in polarity thinking throughout the organization, and basically we were off and running. In that process, they were paying attention to a lot of different polarities. They built very detailed maps. They were starting to integrate it into their entire operations and strategy, and they started to recognize that even though they're paying attention to these things from an organization development standpoint, there's also leadership development to pay attention to, and some of Jim Collins' tensions are leadership focused. Level 5 leadership has a number of tensions specified. So as they were designing their competency model, they said, let's lay these things out in pairs. The result of that process from their competency model involved identifying knowledge and skills on the outside. Those are the same. The outside ring are the same. And they said, these polarity attributes are sort of two sides of the same coin. Our leaders need to be both innovative and operational. They need to be collaborative and directive. They need to be agile and systematic. They need to be intuitive and data-driven. They need to be values-driven and pragmatic. Quite a different shift from making false choices around either or in these tensions.
So we'll move a little quicker here and share a couple more stories and then wrap up with some, I think, great news. This is Tom Stridicus. He's the Dean of the UW College of Education, which houses a Center for Reinventing Public Education. Some of you may be familiar with Tom. Tom convened a meeting of union leaders, folks from AFT, from NEA, school district leaders, reform advocates. 20 people gathered in a room, and their question was, how can we develop and support leaders who will powerfully advocate for the needs and interests of teachers and will help drive education reform? because there were all these stories and polarization going on, Gates Foundation and NEA or whoever. Those people actually got in a room together to say, how do we support people who are advancing both? Because to not do that is a false choice that's holding back what we all want together.
I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what's happening in a healthcare example in a healthcare system. University Hospital systemically paid attention to 13 polarities. I just listed 4 here just for effect. I love the last one, medical care and whole person care. You see standardized and autonomous, just a version of decentralization, centralization. Last I checked, that tension was there 20 years ago. It'll be there 20 years from now. They made the brave choice to say, how do we put our seatbelt on and do this thing well over time, because it's not going away. It's inherently unsolvable by its very nature. So using a very sophisticated technology tool we call the PAC, the Polarity Assessment for Continuity and Change, they are paying attention to 13 polarities in this healthcare system in the US and Canada over time at the enterprise level. That's different from making false choices on all these tensions. I am resisting temptation to talk about the incredible power of this tool and process. What I'm aware of is in every single one of those polarities, there were maps being created by people whose knees were 9 inches apart, in some cases, with polarity, with post-it notes, looking at the polarity from a both-and perspective, flip charts, taking that data, entering it into this tool, paying attention to these over time, asking the question, how are we doing? And there's potential to even drill down and ask not only how are we doing with this polarity, but how are we doing on these different questions in these upsides and downsides? How are we doing nurses compared to doctors? How are we doing? These are brave choices. These are the cultural warriors that Meg Wheatley was talking about that are making this a part of a human conversation and not stereotyping and creating containers around people. We can do it differently. So I just want to end this story by saying there's a lot of good stuff going on out there. And Russ is going to share some more. Do I get an amen?
So, here's news about the economy story around values integration. So a lot of my work in the past 20 years has been with Green America, and our work has been helping to build an integrative economy that doesn't make false choices between producers and consumers, between the planet and economic needs. So despite the stereotypes of, some people say, well, business is all about self-interest and greed and consolidation of wealth, we're seeing a lot of deep values integration happening in the private sector. And we have the language that's emerged in the past 20 years to express that integration. Triple bottom line business, people, planet, profit. We actually call that a multarity. Socially responsible investing, social enterprise, integrative business, conscious capitalism. These are all just terms for the integration of values around self-interest and common good. So the old paradigm is, and in fact, the law in the US for publicly traded companies is, according to the rational man rule, you must maximize profit to shareholders. That's your job as a business. Nonprofits, I like what Peter said the other day, it's about what you're not, because you take care of the other stuff. So that's the old paradigm. The new paradigm, the values integrative paradigm, an example is benefit corporations. So in the last 2 years, 12 states have passed laws that create a new corporate structure which, by their charter, pursue both social benefit and the financial interest of shareholders. So I'm going to share what's actually happening in our real economy in the US. This is a growth of fair trade food segments in the past 10 years compared to the overall food market. 1,442%. Overall food market, 38%. Integration of consumer benefit and producer benefit. We're caring about where our food comes from and who's producing it and the impact on their communities. Livability and sustainability, whatever you call that tension, it's the integration of the environment into our built infrastructure. Green building segment in the past 6 years, grown 1,700%. The overall building and construction industry in the US shrank 17%. Organic food segment. Energy and sustainability. How do we meet our energy needs for the short term and for the long term? Here's the growth of renewable energy segments relative to the fossil fuel energy market. And finally, socially responsible investing, which is actually very explicitly the integration of values of common good into privately managed portfolios and mutual funds. This is actually 2007 to 2010. So much of this was during the period of the down economy. Socially responsible investing has grown 13.2% in assets under management. The overall investment market, 0.4%. So the denial of false choices between this and that, between this thing that we value and that thing that we value, is happening, and people are embracing the world of both. So, our last principle, polarity principle number 10, never stop at balance when leveraging polarities. That's the other thing that people do. They say, oh, it's about balance. Balance is, it's okay, right? It's like we negotiated.
C average, mediocre.
C average, right. Always go for optimization. We're really lifting ourselves up into the upsides of the values pairs and working to stay out of those downsides that lead to the deeper fear. So, do we all have hard choices to make around stocks and flows and taxes and things like that? Yes, those are problems to solve. So we need to solve those. But we're mistaking those choices as a society for these values conflicts and these culture wars and these stories that we're telling about each other's agendas for the future. But these polarities will never go away. The only caveat is, as long as we care about anything, they'll never go away. They're indestructible, they're unsolvable. So we need leaders who can bring this kind of thinking forward, and as you saw, many leaders are. It's happening. So for us, Cliff and I, this is our way of bringing love and understanding and wisdom into the world. For us, that's what this work is about. So we're asking all of you to join us in bringing this forward and having these conversations about both and values and really valuing the wisdom in the other so that we can all be deeper, more powerful warriors of the human spirit. Cliff, you want to end with...
Yeah, I'd like to end with religion. Here's a Franciscan benediction, and I could have chosen any one of a number of traditions, but bear with me here. May God bless you with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships so that you can live deep within your heart. May God bless you with anger at injustice, at oppression, and exploitation of people so that you can work for justice and freedom and peace. May God bless you with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, and war so that you can reach out your hand and comfort them and turn their pain into joy. May God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you can make a difference in this world so that you can do what others claim cannot be done. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a gift. And we have some gifts. Unfortunately, not for everyone in the room. But well, in fact, you see a little Polarity right here, or a big Polarity. This is a gift from a company called Pocket Disc. And the reason we wanted to bring this to you today is because these Pocket Discs are the embodiment of Polarity thinking. So I'm going to quiz you, and then I'll throw these out. All right? All right. They are both flexible and
Yes,
flexible and
over
rigid.
here.
Right? They're flexible, and they're rigid enough to do this. Okay. Oh, cool. All right. They are fair trade, so they're good for both consumers and producers. Okay, we wouldn't be throwing them at you
So hands
if they
up.
weren't both. Yeah, or you could say, in fact, on the back of, this is a different company, but many of you know Jeffrey Hollander, on the back of 7th generation products, safe plus effective. Oh, this is like at the baseball field, right? Okay, do we have more polarities on this?
Yeah. Give me a Polarity, I'll give you a disc.
Okay. These are woven by women in Guatemala based on traditional patterns, and yet they're traditional and modern. This is a new invention, a new innovation. Okay, let's see. Oh, do you have, yeah, here we go. Name it. Yin and yang. We don't have liability insurance, all right?
Yeah.
So they
Safety
came
risk.
in this bag, all right, which is biodegradable. So we all experience the false choice of something that protects our goods and helps make them portable, and something that won't last in the landfill for 500 years. Okay, it's a false choice. So we now have biodegradable cellulose bags. Whoa.
By the way, these were all donated by Pocket Disc, and they're watching from Mexico. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.